Adam, if product design were a culinary experience, you would be the soy sauce-infused pork belly with extra fish sauce and a side of overcooked and rubbery octopus legs.
That is a very apt metaphor. Welcome to Engineer vs. Designer.
The podcast.
For designers,
engineers,
makers, bakers, and people who turn music into jewelry. I am Adam.
And I am Josh. This week we have the great pleasure to speak with the talented Elliot Blanchard of Invisible Light Network. Elliot is a multidisciplinary designer who recently presented his latest 3D printed product at Austin's South by Southwest Festival.
We will start with a design history lesson and, some talk about some tech stuff, courtesy of SolidSmack.com.
You don't say, followed by the same talk, courtesy of CADJunkie.com.
We're going to kind of merge that stuff together. It's all good. Speaking of Pan-Asian food frenzies, Josh, please marinate the mind muscles of our brain cavities with the rice vinegar of knowledge. What have you got for us this week?
This episode of Engineer vs. Designer is brought to you by EVD's very own CAD Junkie. From SolidWorks to Rhino and Modo to Adobe, get a leg up with hours of tutorial content. Get a free membership now at CADJunkie.com. Just in case you're wondering, we've sent out a tweet for this episode. Anyone who retweets that message will be entered into a drawing for a coveted Engineer vs. Designer t-shirt.
Oh, they are coveted, soft, and cottony.
Yes, last week's winner is Slow Plague, who said he would, quote, cut out my eyes to rock an EVD shirt at work.
And we're going to hold you to that, buddy. And that is gory and wonderful. You could be next. Head over to twitter.com/EVD1 and retweet away.
Indeed. Do that.
As you know, this week we're talking with Elliot Blanchard of Invisible Light Network.
Yes, Elliot and his team designed the new bracelet whose form is derived from audio analysis using Rhino's Grasshopper.
And we wanted to talk, first of all, we just wanted to talk about Grasshopper a little bit because we have
Shoot the breeze
a lot
about Grasshopper.
Just talk through it. It started about 2007, I think, and it's developed by McNeil & Associates, the same folks that make Rhino, but it's a separate product, and it's free.
So the first public build had a pretty snazzy name, got a lot of media attention. You might have remembered. Explicit History? Ring a bell?
Yeah.
No?
Uh-huh.
You do?
I do. It does ring a bell.
Okay.
I remember that.
Anybody else?
And I mean, the thing about Grasshopper is that they called it Explicit History, and I guess that is an apt name for it in a way, except that it's a little bit deceptive. Because the thing about Grasshopper is that in some ways, it looks a lot like what you could do in a parametric CAD system like SolidWorks Pro Engineer, whatever, where you design, instead of designing geometry explicitly, you're designing kind of your intent. And then if you change a parameter, then everything updates.
Yeah, it's different. It's different in the sense you're using, it's an algorithm-based software.
Right.
You're not using dimensions necessarily to control the parameters. You're using numbers. You're using algorithms.
Well, you can. That's what's kind of the weird thing about it is you can use numbers that become dimensions. I guess it's more like programming and less like a parametric CAD system, right? And what's tricky about it to me, it's really cool. First of all, I'll say the good stuff first. It is extremely flexible. You can do all kinds of really cool mind-bending things, and anything that you would expect to have in a programming language mathematically is all in there. All kinds of stuff that I have no idea what to do with is in there. Really powerful math calculating functions, stuff you can do with lists to deal with huge data sets, and it's really interesting. The other side of that, though, is that it's a programming language. It's not it doesn't feel like CAD. So things that you're used to being able to do are hard to do in Grasshopper. You're like, I want to punch a hole in that thing over there. You're like, well, I got to define a point, and then I got to define a plane, and then I got to. It's just you
get a little visual feedback, but it's really it's really complex on the equation side, I guess. But it does work beautifully for really very beautiful organic forms, and really what most people will be familiar with are those products out there that have really interesting patterns around them.
Yeah, right. So generative patterns, shapes, especially along really organic shapes. So you've got some really smooth flowing shape, like Stuart Fingerhut we've had on the show before. Yes. Does some really cool furniture designs where he's got a chair that's really all smooth and flowing and swoopy, but he's got a crazy pattern all over it that changes as it moves across the surface. You can do that kind of stuff really well using Grasshopper. But the geometry kernel is still Rhino's geometry kernel. And to me, that's the biggest drawback with it. You can use it to create a surface model, but if you're starting to try to create a solid model to actually make something with, then it has the same limitations that Rhino does in general, where filleting is really hard to do. It's, so I think it's an amazing tool, and it's a great way to get something started. And then if I'm doing a mechanical design after that, then I'm probably going to export it over to a parametric.
Is there anything else out there that's similar? Any other software? I don't know of any that does.
I've never seen anything like it, frankly. You can do that kind of stuff using scripting languages, right? Yeah. If you're a code head. So it's filling an interesting gap, right? It's an interesting niche between coding and visual modeling.
Yeah. Who knew algorithms could look so sexy?
Have you been able to make anything sexy with it?
Nothing. Nope.
I made a cloud of points one time.
Did you?
Yeah, that was about the extent of my...
That's not that sexy, actually. You need to go look at Stuart's designs and the bracelet from our upcoming guest.
Yep. Why don't we roll that tape?
Up next.
So, Elliot, thanks so much for being on the show with us today. We have one deep probing question for you before we get started. If you could become the greatest break dancer ever on planet Earth, but in order for that to happen, you had to do the worm anytime you wanted to walk anywhere, would you do that?
It would depend if my clown suit was back from the dry cleaner. I guess that would be the deciding factor.
All right. Yeah.
Even better. All right. Elliot, thanks again for being with us. First, we want to know a little more about you. Invisible Light Network, it's your website. What is it, and where did you get that name, man?
Invisible Light Network is sort of the evolution of an earlier sort of website. It's kind of a funny story. I had an earlier website that was called Royal Color Network, and so when I started the studio Invisible Light Network, I wanted to come up with something that was similar, but equally impenetrable. So I wanted to do something that could either be a design studio or potentially a cult, right. Depending on which way I wanted to go for tax purposes.
Right.
Gotta remember the taxes. Right.
So how many people are you're up in New York, right? How many people are working with you?
We're based in Brooklyn. We're still a pretty small studio. It really depends on the project because we do so many different things. We have different teams of people, but we're like under 10 people right now. We're a nice small studio.
And you have a long list of creative services on the site, everything from film to experience design. What do you guys actually do?
So this is a question we get all the time. So we do, so we do all of it. And I think that it's kind of our definite belief that, the sort of design industry is moving in a direction that people want to work with studios that can come up with, high level conceptual stuff and then, execute it in a variety of different fields, depending on, what is right for that job, for that client, for that concept.
It's kind of that whole convergence concept, right? All these different media coming together. Yeah.
Oh yeah. We definitely believe in that big time. And it's less, the idea of dabbling and more the idea of we're bringing sort of our, design perspective to the client. And, we can take that design perspective to a variety of different fields, depending on what's right for that project and that client. And, I think that gets into the whole, a lot of production is becoming digital and getting to the place, where you can have a smaller studio be involved in a lot of different things. That's happening in, obviously we're talking about industrial design, that's equally happening in traditional animation and CG, in film production. And so, it gives us an opportunity to, create something like we're trying to create here where we can get involved in a lot of different things.
Now you've had some pretty big clients too. You got listed IBM, Adidas, Pepsi, Nokia. Give us some examples of some work you did for these guys, and tell us what's been your favorite so far.
So we've done with a lot of the big clients traditionally. We've done broadcast design for advertising, and that includes traditional animation, CG, VFX type stuff, and some live action as well. Now, some of that, like for instance, Intel was involved with the Intel Creators Project, and that was a pretty cool installation project that involved live 3D scanning that then tied into CG. That was definitely a fun one, although we do really get into just doing traditional animation as well. I think that we're very interested in, trying to bring some of these 3D printing type projects to these bigger clients as well, and we've gotten a lot of interest in it as well. So I think that's going to be something cool that we'll be able to like fold in the future.
So do you go to them with a concept, or do they come to you?
It's both ways, I think, depending on the project. Sometimes they'll come and they'll have like a very detailed concept, and your job is, to execute that as well as possible. The projects that we prefer, that I think that we get more and more in the interactive and installation space, is where they come to you, right at the very beginning of the project for the initial concept. And, that's like a very collaborative process if you're working with them, and then you take it from there all the way through. And that's very exciting.
Nice.
Yeah.
And when you say traditional animation, that of course means like flip books, right?
That means everything from, oh yeah. Well, I was thinking more like shadows on cave walls.
Oh, right.
We've done some work there that we're really
Kids
proud
love
of.
that these days.
It's the shadow puppets. You're right. Okay. Well, so do you personally, Elliot, you've mentioned industrial design. Are you trained as an industrial designer and you do other things now? Or do you consider yourself primarily, an art director, media person? What's your favorite thing to do?
Yeah. Well, actually, let me back up and give you like a real answer to the last question.
Okay.
When we say traditional animation, we usually mean in the context of what we do, animation that does not have an interactive component. Gotcha. So that can mean anything from like traditional 2D cell animation to 3D CG stuff and VFX type thing. Or,
I see. As long as it's not interactive.
Yeah, we have like a little bit of a different definition, just in terms of like it's stuff it's more like lean back, non-interactive things. So that's probably a better answer to that question. I come from a background in animation, motion design, and interactive stuff. Industrial design is something new that we're getting into. That's very exciting for us. And again, it goes back to, now with the advent of 3D printing and, companies like Shapeways, it's something that a design studio such as ourselves can get involved in without having to get involved with like, enormous setup costs on the fabrication side. So I think that the sort of like onset of 3D printing has kind of like opened the door for us to get involved with industrial design. And I think it'll lead to a lot of other things, but it sort of brought us into the field as well.
So I guess one of your first products that you've gone into industrial design with is the new bracelet, NU bracelet that you presented out at South by Southwest. For the listeners out there who haven't heard of this, it's a 3D printed bracelet that is really a physical manifestation of audio analysis generated code. You can turn any song into a 3D printed bracelet. So
such a cool concept.
It looks pretty slick too. Elliot, can you sort of give us the background on how this project started and really how you ended up at South by Southwest?
So this was a pretty cool project for us because, this was, and we do, we're able to do these kind of projects pretty frequently, but this was like a totally experimental project that was like initiated by us, without having a client involved. So it was sort of a way for us to kind of like explore and push ourselves. So the way we kind of got into this specifically is, as a studio, we've always been interested in music, in fashion, and 3D printing was something that was very exciting for us as well. So, in general, when we started, we were looking for something that could kind of like, bring all of those three things together, and hopefully, we could apply sort of like our viewpoint and hopefully do something interesting with it. So that was kind of like the genesis of the project, is that we kind of looked around and we were like, we're into these three things. Let's see, what we can do with it. In terms of South by, we got involved with Shapeways very early in the project and, quickly found out that they are fantastic and just the greatest people to work with. And South by kind of happened because we were actually going to be there because we had another project called Ring that was an installation project going up there, and Shapeways was going there as well. And so, we kind of got together and teamed up on that, and Shapeways ended up sort of showcasing new at their South by booth. So it actually, it's it's like sometimes when you're onto something good because everything like just starts to fall into place, and that's what really happened here.
Just kind of happens all at once. I mean, so tell us a little bit about developing for the Shapeways API. I mean, you guys must have some serious experience with this kind of thing prior, but for somebody who's interested in it, how hard was that? I mean, you guys have full-time programmer people working on this stuff. How did you do that?
No, actually, for this, it's interesting. We did not need to have a full-time person because they've definitely, credit to them, done a lot of work in, making the API process very easy to use. For us, it was like incredibly simple, and the programming overhead was, negligible.
Okay, so explain to us what did you do with the API, and then how did you do it?
Okay, so what we specifically did with the API is we used the part of their API that allows us to embed a Shapeways shopping cart into our InvisibleLightNetwork.com website. So that's the part we used. That was very convenient. So, we have on our site a place where people can go in and put in their information, which song they want, what the artist is, all of that for their own new. And then when we create that, they come back to our website and they see, very nicely embedded in there, like a Shapeways shopping cart embedded in our website. And then it's just like one click and they're off. And everything is handled. So that's how we use the API, and it was like incredibly simple. I know that they're also doing a lot of other cool stuff, like being able to submit STL files to the API, being able to query them about like materials, pricing, and also
so you can basically have your very own Shapeways right there in your site.
Yeah, exactly. And then you can also do things where you can be like submitting things to Shapeways through your website, but it's all staying on your website for the client. So it's pretty cool.
But you guys, so you guys are creating an object that is this dynamic, though. It's based on an audio recording. And so what's really cool about that is the parametric nature of it. And I'm sure there are a lot of listeners out there that would hear this and kind of bells are ringing in their heads, because you could very easily set up something where a user comes in and types in the parameters of some bracket or something more functional than a bracelet, and use that same API to kind of send that custom object off, and basically the user experience only sees your company, but really the thing is drop shipped from Shapeways, which is pretty sweet. Yeah,
there's like 7 different parameters you guys are looking at there in just the song.
Yeah, there's a bunch of different stuff that we look at in the song, and it's all a parametric design process, and I mean that gets into this was all developed in Rhino with their Grasshopper framework, and that was really perfect for this project because Grasshopper, and this was the first time we'd used it, is just a fantastic, programming environment for 3D in terms of like enabling things like this that, are data driven and, really infinitely customizable. And so the Grasshopper framework, really easily was able to handle us feeding so many different types of audio data into it and, being able to produce, a clean, legitimate shape that could go right to production.
And is it really actually completely automated? Like when they upload their song or whatever, does a human have to do the Grasshopper thing, or have you guys got some magic that makes that happen on its own?
We're involved in large part because it's a multi-step process. Like we do some audio analysis in separate programs, and then we bring that over to Rhino for the actual data processing. So we're involved, but so it's not like push button, but it's pretty highly automated.
Cool.
Which is cool because like that gets into another thing. Like we wanted to do something where, it really was like rigorously like looking at the song information, and it was using that data in like a way that made sense for like the type of audio data it was. So for instance, one of the things it looks at is beats per minute. And we wanted to have it be so that, the way that was expressed in the bracelet, made sense visually in a similar way to the way that, beats per minute makes sense in the song. And we didn't want it to be like it was just looking at numbers and then it was kind of doing some sort of mumbo jumbo and it was kind of like a black box and it wasn't really apparent, what the relationships were. And Grasshopper was really good at, being able to be kind of like rigorous about it.
So you mentioned the interest in fashion and ultimately came up with the bracelet idea. Why the bracelet, and were there other things you considered about using a song to make like a table sculpture or a lamp or something?
Yeah, so we did think about a lot of different things, both like bigger than a bracelet, like a table and a lamp and all of that, or smaller, like a ring. And the bracelet we picked because it was like it was kind of like the sweet spot between being large enough that you could clearly see like the audio data, and it was, not so small that everything kind of got mushed together. And it wasn't so big that it then became, like very expensive for a customer to buy in terms of, like the current cost today of like 3D printing. So like we actually thought about a lot of different things like rings, earrings, necklaces, so on and so forth. And the bracelet was kind of like the sweet spot between being big enough to really be able to see detail and small enough that it was still reasonably priced.
Guys and girls can both wear bracelets too.
Not just a necklace or earrings.
Definitely a lot of orders from both.
Yeah.
Right on.
And on the industrial design side of things, as you guys are conceptualizing these ideas, are you doing that primarily in 3D? Do you sketch things out first? What's your process like?
We actually do, and this isn't just for the industrial design. This is kind of like our universal process. Is we do a lot of like writing actually before we even get into sketching, just in terms of, so why is that important? And I think the reason is it like forces you to have like a concept that's good, because if you write it down and it sounds kind of like obvious, or it doesn't sound like there's a lot there, then, there probably isn't, no matter how pretty you make it. And so we actually spent a lot of time writing, about, what does a song mean? What is important in a song? Like, how would that be expressed? And then we moved into, from there, sketching, and then took that into, the Rhino framework. And we actually looked at a lot of different frameworks when we started out, because we had the benefit of time, because this was sort of a self-directed project. So we looked at Rhino and Grasshopper, which is what we ultimately used. We looked at doing things with Maya Fluids. We looked at doing things with Houdini. We looked at doing things with ZBrush. So we really looked at a bunch of different packages to see, what fit the concept the best.
Right.
So how would you say you approach each project? Do you have sort of a system in place and certain people that you use for spawning these creative ideas, or do you just I know you work with a lot of clients, but for this, for the bracelet, you said it was one of your own designs. So how does that process start, and how do you go through it?
So that's actually what, is like unified across like everything that we do, whether it is like an industrial design project or, a short film or an animated piece. Actually, like the early stages are all very similar. And I kind of got into that a little bit, but we definitely always start with just brainstorming, like literally just sitting around a table, not even writing things down at that point, just like really just kind of like, bouncing ideas off each other. And then from there, usually we go down to writing, writing the concepts out, trying to think of, like intellectually, they're really interesting and they make sense. And then from there, actually, again, almost for every type of project we do, we go to sketching. And then, from there, it starts to branch out a little bit depending on what kind of project. But I think that it might sound a little counterintuitive, but it's very important to have a structure to the early design phases to kind of like support your thinking so that you don't get into the point, you don't quickly get into the place where you just kind of like feel like, you're sort of wandering around. And I think that having that structure helps you come up with good ideas.
Now, something that's really interesting to us about this 3D printing phenomenon, I think, when we were on the phone with Carl Bass the other day, he was saying that he joked that 3D printing is the overnight success that took 25 years, because they've been around forever. It's just that all of a sudden, this thing has kind of exploded in the past year, and people are really, really excited about it in a way that kind of came out of nowhere, considering that the technology's been around so long. And a lot of that has to do with cost and availability of software and all that stuff. But there's a lot of debate right now about, how is this going to impact actual consumers, right? Because the parts that come back have certain kinds of limitations at this point. Where do you think 3D printing will be, say, 3 years from now, something not too long in the future? And how is that going to impact actual consumers, in your opinion?
I think that, well, it's definitely interesting what he said, and I agree with it, that it kind of exploded. And I think another interesting reason why it did explode is definitely due to, I'm not a lawyer, but my understanding was in the past few years, a couple of like fundamental patents involving 3D printing and sintering and some of the big techniques expired. So,
right.
Other companies were able to move into the space and start doing their own work. And that was a big initiator to it as well. And I think, you can go even farther back, and I hope I'm not getting too off topic, but I think people don't realize that 3D printing is like the latest and one of the most exciting expressions of, a lot of revolutionary work that's been going on with computer-controlled manufacturing and design that's been going on,
right?
Way longer than that in terms of water jet. And it's
sure, yeah.
There's so much stuff. I think in answer to the question of consumer outlook for the next 3 years, I myself, and I know that a lot of people have a different opinion, but I myself cannot think of scenarios in which you would have like large numbers of black boxes, whatever they are, sitting on people's desks at home in the next 3 years.
Right.
I think, and that goes to the cost question, that goes to the materials question. Now, I can see a lot of ways in which 3D printing is going to be like is already and is going to continue to be a really important part of, manufacturing and design industries. And I can definitely see, and I'm already seeing this for sure, a lot of design studios feeling like, now that they need to have a 3D printer in their shop to really operate today. I think that's where the biggest revolution is going to be, and it's already occurring.
So as far as the CNC machines go, and really you talked about sort of an upheaval here in the design community. What about on the manufacturing side? Do you think we're going to see a total upheaval there? I mean, we've had a lot of interest in 3D printing. There's been a lot of talk about copyright restrictions and a lot of coverage on the political side, from the gun parts to the copyright concerns. What do you think is going to be happening on the manufacturing side?
Well, I think just to bring it back to where I'm based in Brooklyn, I think that the 3D printing and CNC stuff over the last 5, 10, 15, 25 years has brought like a lot of high-end manufacturing back, not only to the U.S., but also into cities, which is something that I don't think people would have really expected, 50 years ago.
Yeah,
There's actually, and I don't know if people know this, but, there's a lot of really high-end manufacturing going on in New York City these days. And, it's a situation where they're able to do that because, they can have 3D printers, they can have water jets, they can have laser cutters, and not need to have this enormous like smoke belching factory. And so, they can operate in cities And, why is that important? Because they can be like really close to their customers, rather than having to, order something from halfway around the world, they're like a subway ride away from their big customers. And I think that's a big revolution that computer-controlled manufacturing has had, of which 3D printing is being a big part of. In terms of the copyrights, again, I think that goes to how soon you think consumers are going to have something sitting on their desk that they can just punch a button and with very little technical knowledge have, like a high quality manufactured object come out the other end. The gun thing is very interesting. I'm not an expert in gun manufacturing. I feel like it's a little bit of a stunt just based on the fact that most people with an ID background know that, you can actually make a gun much easier with like very simple machine tool.
Right, you can use your grandfather's metal lathe to make a gun that is a lot more effective than the plastic thing that you would print.
I understand what he's doing. Like they're trying to make a point about a lot of issues. I feel like the gun manufacturing thing is definitely a red herring, and the reason it maybe concerns me a little bit is that I think that it could lead to some not helpful legislation potentially happening around 3D printing that is kind of like addressing a problem that in my mind doesn't even exist. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yep.
Well, so what kinds of projects do you guys have in the pipeline now? Is there something that you can tell us, or is it all top secret?
We are actually in our way, as we are. We're now working on a traditional animation project right now.
Okay.
That we're very excited about, and we have a bunch of other installation pieces in the pipeline that involve a lot of cool interactive stuff that I can't talk about right now. And these us finishing new and getting it out there, we've had a lot of people talk to us about projects spinning off from that I would have never even imagined or thought of when we got into this, but are very interesting. And clearly people are thinking of something like this. And we call it like the mass production, mass customization that, can apply to like a lot of stuff that is very interesting. So I have to do this stay tuned thing, but I think there's going to be a lot of interesting things coming.
Right.
All right. Well, we'll hold you to that. We will stay tuned, by the way.
Yeah, definitely, Elliot. Thanks so much for your time today. Very, very good talking to you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, guys.
All right. Not a bad conversation, Mr. Mings.
Not a bad one at all, Adam.
In fact, Josh, having Elliot on the show was even better than that time I put Nair in your shampoo bottle.
Wait, what? I'm balding?
Yeah, well, not actually.
Watch your back, buddy. Watch your back. That's all I'm saying. Now, if you'd like to send me a better-looking toupee, it looks like I'm going to need it.
Yep.
Address it to Josh.
I could
Please.
use one of those myself, actually. We want to hear from you. Let us know what
Adam
you
Bald.
think you want to see on the show, and your favorite Grasshopper trick over at EngineerVsDesigner.com or on the EVD YouTube and or Vimeo channel.
And if you'd like to see us swimming in a pool of our own angst, be sure to like us, +1 us, tweet us, or whatever else is. As social media has been correlated with combing hair in front of your face, taping Band-Aids on your nipples, and listening to Morrissey.
This show was edited by the masterful Simon Martin. If you love our taste in music and you want some added auditory mojo to help propel you through the workday, be sure to check out a new playlist on SolidSmack Radio every Tuesday on SolidSmack.com.
Yep. And we'll see you next week. And remember, without engineers, designers would be flying coach and chartreuse hot air balloons.
And without designers, engineers would wear velvet muumuus and sneakers to work because they are, quote, so comfortable.
Weak.
Oh, I'm not the one who said that, buddy.
A production of EVD Media.